You're listening to the Discussing the Resilient podcast, hosted by Aiden Smalley and William Reid, a competitive 40k podcast for the servants of Nurgle and the fallen 14th Legion. Tactics, meta-analysis, and all things Death Guard.
Hi guys, so welcome back to Discussing the Resilient podcast part 2. Obviously the name is still up for debate, so we've continued with it as it is. But firstly, thank you very much to everyone who listened to the first episode. We were over the moon with the support. You know, me and Aiden are big Death Guard fans, and we thought the community sort of lacked something like this. And we thought we'd be happy with 200 or 300 players and, you know, a few subscribers, and nearly 1,000 players, over 100 subscribers with one episode.
In a week, Will. In a week.
In a week, there you go. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to pretend it was all me, but I think it's you there, Aiden. I think your prowess and performance last year, I think, has it's got everyone eating out of your hands, shall we say?
Yeah, sure thing. This thing wouldn't even exist if it weren't for you doing all the technical part of it. But yeah, thank you everyone for obviously giving us a listen. We hope you enjoyed the first episode. We know it was a little bit here, there, everywhere, but obviously it was, you know, lots of stuff was happening. The new meta had just come in. Arcs has obviously just come out. Lots to talk about, lots to break down. So we're hoping over these next few episodes we can start to get a bit more structure, a bit more on topic in certain episodes. But everyone, thank you so much for all the support you've showed us so far. And we hope it to continue as we're here, episode 2.
Yeah, that's it. So we're not sure how regular we're going to make them. I think maybe either 2 weeks or once a month. We're not sure. Depends on how much is happening with Death Guard. Then obviously when there's things happening in the game, then we'll obviously cover them like World Eaters. We're not going to do that this episode because if that probably deserves like an episode in itself, where we can sort of talk about World Eaters and what kind of a game Death Guard have got into them, talk about some list archetypes and maybe a few tactics. Obviously, you know, surprise, Foul Blightspawn's king in that matchup. But this one we're going to sort of run through just the general things. Obviously, Aiden asked the community some questions last week, and we listened, and we're going to try and sort of answer them as best we can. Or, well, Aiden answer them, and I'll prompt him. So I mean, first things first. I mean, so Aiden, what have you been up to since the last episode? Have you managed to get any games in, or?
I've had 1 or 2 games on my Death Guard. I have been playing Votann a bit for a bit of a freshen up, so do forgive me everyone. But I have been trying out some new stuff, which we'll talk about in a bit. And I've been surprised at some of the changes I've made, and it might be interesting to hear about. But we'll get there when we talk about our lists and our changes and whatnot. But yeah, at the moment I've basically been relaxing a bit, playing Votann as a side army, and then just, you know, hobbying, painting, whatnot,
relaxing,
living a normal life.
Depends how you look at that one. Bigger trader.
Well, I'm not playing the meta list. I play my own. I'm just playing I'm not playing like Double Fortress, all that stuff. I'm playing my own little silly list. I just want to shoot stuff with a railgun.
Fair play. I played against Votann for the first time the other day, and they're fun.
It hurt.
It does hurt. That run that's at the laser, and then it just everything that draws a line over. It hits, and then the further you are away, when it hits, it just
does more hits. Yeah,
more hits. Yeah, that was fun. And then when you've got a judgment token, then it just gets to shoot back at you with its laser. So then it just gets to like get 3 shots in your turn. Yeah, it was.
Oh, your opponent cheated you on that one, mate. It's only infantry that can return fire.
Oh, that's a bit spicy. There you go. Luckily, it didn't affect the game, but there we go. I didn't realise that.
Read your rules, people.
That's it. Yeah. Oh wow.
No, it's cool. It's a new army. People make mistakes. It's normal, innit? It happens. Even I make mistakes sometimes. You know, no one's perfect.
Oh, there you go. Just sometimes you make mistakes.
It's when I make it's a big fucking mistake.
There you go.
I've just lost the game.
So have you actually have you lost a game since like outside of events and Aiden? Is there anything that you've sort of come up against that you've sort of struggled into, or have you sort of been playing more sort of casual stuff and just trying out new ideas?
So the struggle is probably higher than it definitely was in Nephilim, but I've only played about 3-4 games with Death Guard at the moment in Arcs. Like I said, people that are listening, just to give you a concept, I've played Death Guard only for like the past 5 years. So when Votann came out, I'm a big Dwarf fan, so I've just been playing them a little bit just to give myself a bit of a refresh. But weirdly, and I've surprised myself. I thought when Death Guard and Arcs, I was like, right, this is a good time to maybe take a little break. But as I've been playing my Votann, I've been sat there and I've been like, God, I really want to play Death Guard.
Where's the -1 damage?
Yeah, it's not just that. It's just like it's just little tricks, and it's just also I really like new meta's exciting. You know, even if people say it's doom and gloom for Death Guard, it's still exciting. It's still time to go and test new things. And like I said, we'll go into these improvements and these crazy wacky things I'm going to try out, and I've been testing them with some pretty good results. And it's just, even when you're like in a bad spot as an army and a new meta comes out, it's still just fun to have a fresh feel of the game.
No, I think that's really good.
And you know what, you can sit there and you can complain and just get negative about the army, and in some aspects, you know, they have point in some areas, but at the end of the day, like, it's the army I'm going to play regardless, so I might as well stop complaining and just, you know, get to playing.
No, I think that's the best way. I mean, obviously, when it comes to singles, I always take Death Guard. I do own Chaos Knights, and I ran Knights this weekend at a teams tournament, actually, and again, just wished I was playing Death Guard the whole time. Especially when you sort of just being move blocked and can't walk through stuff, you're like, oh, wish I had Plague Marines. Plague Marines could sort this out. So yeah.
So breaching.
That's it, yeah. If I had Plague Marines and a Rhino, I'd be much happier. So yeah, I know the feeling with that one. I mean, talking of Death Guard and obviously Tom's, I did take them to a singles event though. There was an event in Bolton. It was actually the one that people who also listen to Mikey from Hellstorm, his channel to one, he went third at a couple of weeks ago. So I was there. Yeah, not pushing on the top tables, sadly, but I went 2.5. So I won the first one against Jason, who's the organiser. I mean, we run events as well, so me and Jason are collaborating on something. So it was more of a friendly game. We had a lot of chats and stuff. But I did pull the win out against his what's the Eldar one where they have the Incarn and stuff?
Yannari.
The Yannari, yes. I beat his Yannari. Then I had a game against Blood Angels and beat Blood Angels. He was a good Blood Angels player, but he had, I thought, in my opinion at least, his squads were too big. So his Sanguine Guards, like 10-man squads, and it was the mission where you have the diagonal objectives across the middle. Yeah, he was just too compact, so I was able just to sort of like pull him apart basically.
Yeah, and when you finally connect, it's haze of corruption, go brr.
Yeah, that's it. The blight grenades, and the biologist putrefier again coming up trumps, you know, like we mentioned.
Oh yeah, with AOC gone, they are back to being so lethal.
Oh yeah, I mean, you don't even need to spread the contagion. You know, you just sort of take them out with Death Company, throw the grenades into Death Company, and then charge what's left, or you can charge into, you know, like another squad. And yeah, the Plague Marines traded up nearly every time, which was really good. Then I lost against Iron Hands, which is something that we're going to touch on as part of the hard things. Yeah,
they hit real hard.
Oh mate, there's so many silly rules. I mean, I suppose this might be a good time for the people, you know, because obviously maybe the people who are listening to this have never played against Iron Hands or never played 8th edition and don't have the post-traumatic stress disorder hangover that we all do. But yeah, it was just like, it was like being in a time warp. It was like, you know, everyone re-rolls ones with heavy weapons and everyone's got a heavy weapon, and then also they get the
they all ignore heavy for the grab pods and stuff.
Yeah, and then they get what's a reroll called when they get to just reroll one hit or wound?
Oh, Master Artisans.
Yeah, the Master Artisans, and then they get 2 points for killing something with the heavy weapons.
Which their entire army is, so it's literally kill you and you get 2 victory points.
Yeah, it was so silly. And so that was it. Even though the Plague Marines could trade, I just couldn't match the firepower, unfortunately. So it was... yeah, I mean, that's something that I don't think the Death Guard game into it's terrible, though. I think I didn't screen the drop pod out as well as I could have done. I could have just advanced the spawn, and yeah, I don't know why. I thought I had a bit more cover behind the terrain that I was behind, and it didn't sort of work out there. But I mean, you know, I suppose...
To be fair to you, Will, like, we haven't played against Marines and drop pods in, like, what, almost, like, is it almost 2 years now since, like, the proper Iron Hands thing? So like it's sort of like a self-reminder now. Like, I saw a drop pod, I played against it, and I was like, oh yeah, that comes in on turn 1 if it wants to. I was like, oh, I have to think about this now. Yeah,
and this is it. The outflanking mechanic as well is also sort of, because obviously sort of being Death Guard, we're not as quick, so you outflanked a couple of the I don't know what you call them, the derpiest looking things though. It's like the Marines sitting down on a platform that can move around while he's sitting down. I remember them being sort of like a meme when they came out.
But the Fire Strike turrets.
Yeah, he had 2 of them, and he brought them in from the side. Again, he just used them to get angles on stuff. Just pop rhinos, and then once the Marines were exposed, he just horsed them down with all his grav cannons and all the other fun stuff that popped out the drop pod.
Yeah.
So yeah, because it dropped down the previous turn that they came in from reserve, but I wasn't able to clear it all. I did my best. One plague Marine squad, like I say, threw the grenades and charged, but they actually failed to charge them. They managed to fail a 7-inch charge with a reroll, which is a bit frustrating. But
that's unlucky.
Yeah, it happens. So, but then continue on the next game. I actually had. So this is something actually we should probably touch as well. Actually, this is the first time I've talked about this event. So I actually had a weird game into Tau. It's against a guy called Terry. He's a great guy. So me and Terry, we played a while ago, and we always chat at events. So it was quite nice to be paired into each other. So when we played it though, there was a moment in the game. So I actually won the game by about 7 points, but I won the game with an accidental gotcha. So when we kind of talked it through, we kind of pulled it back and agreed the draw was a little bit more fair, because he had one Poxwalker behind a wall, a sneaky Poxwalker he got libbed at the end, and he knew he was there, but he forgot about him, and where he was standing, he was under a ledge, and he was playing Tau, so we could have killed him a million different ways in a million different times.
Yeah.
And I took Despoiled Grounds and spread the sickness. So basically, I hadn't spread the sickness on the objective on that side yet, and Despoiled Ground, it got me a table quarter, so that one Poxwalker living scored me...
Yeah, literally 7 point swing.
7 point swing, yeah, which is what I won the game by. So we kind of talked it through, and then he was like, cause in his second, I went sort of second, so he was like, well, if I knew you could do that, I would have maybe been a bit more tight on my last play, because he was like, I didn't think you could possibly win, and I was like, when we talked it through, I was like, do you know what, mate, it's fair. So in the end, we kind of talked it back, and we said that, 7 points didn't count, we called it a draw, which in the end was right, because, as much as it's a competitive podcast, I don't think either of us want to promote the, competitive people win at all costs. It's about, having fun and things, and going 3, I suppose at that point there was still a game left as well, going 3-1 or, 2.5 and 1, when realistically I'm not going to get the top tables and beat Iron Hands, because it's going to be Iron Hands again or something like that. It was nice just to have a nice experience and sort of walk away from the table, sort of knowing that next time I see Terry, me and him are still going to have banter and, and not feel like there's an awkward sort of, he got cheated out of a win or whatever. So that was that. Yeah. And then last game I played GSC, which was rough, going first against them, because obviously when you play, you know second, don't you? So the blips deploy, because again, if people haven't played GSC in the Cup, they deploy the first turn in blips. So they don't really deploy anything at all unless they want to do like some forward deploy. They have to put that on the table to do that. So you don't know where anything is, and basically they get to then choose what comes out, what blips. So it's really easy for them to sort of get the jump on you, basically, especially when they're a much quicker army. And it was hard to trade with the Plague Marines then as well, because even if you grenaded one's got in charge another, they generally have more units than me, so it still wasn't quite enough to trade into them, I found. So that was an interesting one. I did lose that one, but overall it was a great event.
Yeah, that matchup specifically at GSC, I could definitely tell you now, because I played against Malik at Leicester with his GSC.
Oh yeah, you did, didn't you?
Yeah, and I can tell the amount of like small arms AP1 they have is quite high. So losing AOC actually makes that matchup a lot harder than it was when I played against it. Obviously, it's basically AP0 versus me, so I had a lot more ability to tank shots. I had like a death shot tank, an absurd amount of like shooting from guys and then just start chopping stuff up. But obviously, it's a lot harder now because of AOC guns. So it's another one of those interesting matchups where before it might have been a bit of a cakewalk for Death Guard, and it could have been in some aspects. Obviously, they have a lot of play still because it's a very tricksy army. But now with the AP1 mattering again, you have to sort of like, you have to really give it a lot more respect in that matchup. It's a tough matchup, really.
Yeah, pretty much. And then he had the Aberrants,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was weird because they have -1 damage as well, don't they? Why do they have -1 damage? -1 damage? And I was like, I've got -1 damage too. I was like, this is why people get frustrated when they play the Death Guard. So yeah, I did feel that when my Blight Grenade still just did 1 damage. I was like, oh, this is. I should have thought about this a little bit more and asked some more questions.
When Malik's Aberrants came into my Death Shard, I was like, all right, I'm going to slam, and he was like, the -1 damage. I was like, all right, I'm going to sweep.
Yeah, see, that's the right decision because they don't have a great armor save, do they? I think
it's like 5 up. Yeah, I think it's just 5 pinball and something weird, but yeah, just sweep it. But yeah, obviously they are tougher, especially given the feel no pain as well. They can become a nightmare to shift.
Yeah, I really struggled just getting through them, and then I had the Knights. So I'm still running the 3 Executioners, and the flat 3 damage on them because again the -1, it's frustrating how much they should just go through them, and obviously 3 turns to 2. But then again, it's what people complain when they shoot the Death Shroud and Blight Dog Terminators and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, it's funny because people always say, you hear a lot of people who are down on Death Guard saying that -1 damage is now useless because everything's damage 1,000,000. But when you actually play against a unit, like you said, even just one unit with -1 damage, you actually realize how annoying it is to deal with. Now you imagine that across an entire army. It is not a useless ability by a long shot. It is still a very powerful ability. Damage 2 to damage 1, damage 3 to damage 2 is absolutely insane for efficiency of trying to kill Plague Marines / Terminators. And when you actually experience against someone else, it's sort of a stark reminder of, this is how annoying I am.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's an interesting one as well, because obviously, talking sort of broad strokes here about Death Guard, because you rightly say, the -1 damage, we all forget actually how annoying that is. Because obviously, we always remember as Death Guard players, -1 damage means nothing when it's mortal wounds and, you're just picking your models up. But, a lot of armies, do really struggle with it. And it's something that, it does sort of work out. I mean, I suppose it's the pace of the army that is the big problem against it, because -1 damage, as much as it's good, it is useful, it's not good enough when you sort of can't get to cover within a turn. Sometimes you spend 1 turn stood out in the open with Plague Marines, or maybe a smaller Terminator unit, and you do find that it gets picked up really easy. So
oh yeah. See, there's an interesting thing. I was talking to Don Hooson on the Death Guard Discord, and he made a very valid point, actually. He said, Death Guard, don't look at it as the army of resilience, look at it as the army that reduces your opponent's resilience. Because when you start treating it like that, you stop putting yourself in positions where you're thinking, oh, I'm the tanky army, I can survive all the shooting. Because 9 times out of 10, we both know you actually can't. You can make their shooting very inefficient, but you will still die. But our ability to lower enemies' durability with, obviously our Flash Outbreak for an extra AP onto them, and also dropping everyone's toughness by 1, and then being able to disable people with such stuff like, Stench Fights or Ferryman if you're playing that. We're actually pretty good at, making others easier to kill. And we'll talk about that when we come into the meta matchups, because obviously Dark Angels are up there, Custodes are doing really well, and I think we actually have pretty good matchups into those. Again, we'll get there when we get there, but it's just an interesting way to sort of look at the army. Don't look at it as this is the hard to kill tanky army, even though it probably should be, lore wise. But when he said it, it was quite interesting, because it is true. The amount of times people, this is the one thing I've never understood. People always say Death Guard have little damage. I've never struggled for damage. When we're in brawling range, I just min stuff. If it comes close and you get a Flash Outbreak off, or you just get that Contagions all going, you just murderize anything that comes near you. You've seen it with grenade combos, etc. You can just absolutely obliterate units. So it's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, it's just the range damage, isn't it? That sometimes when you play armies that do all the damage at range, and if you're on a board that's a bit lighter, maybe you've got no little RTT and they haven't got the best terrain, that's when you really feel it. But you're right, for the most part though, especially the way that 9th editions work, where there's always objectives in the middle to trade over, as long as you can get to the objectives, generally the damage isn't really the issue.
I will say a quick thing you just said there about tables and stuff, because it was mentioned in our comments. Me and Will are aware, obviously, that everyone plays on different sort of board setups and terrain types. Obviously, we had LVO recently, bit of drama there regarding terrain on the top players, etc. We're not going to go into it. We're not really too asked about top tier drama, whatever, but it does raise a valid point. Tables do matter, and where you play and the sort of tables you play on do massively improve Death Guard or worsen Death Guard. And Will's completely right. You play on a fairly barren table against mobile shooting armies like Tau, it's going to be really hard, and I'm not even going to sit here and try and tell you it's going to be Death Guard fine on that set. That is genuinely almost nightmare scenario for Death Guard. But for me and Will, for example, who play a lot on UKTC, you play mostly on UKTC as well, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, obviously in the UK we have UKTC,
Glasshammer.
Glasshammer, which we do at our events, and then we also have the WTC stuff, because Matt Robinson, who's one of the Team England guys, I think their club, the Northern Warlords, they invested in the Team England WTC sets, so they're actually sort of in our local area. Events hire them and things like that. So actually, we play on WTC sets more than most other people do. So again, those are really dense boards, you know.
And really dense boards is like where Death Guard really can start to shine because you can obviously start getting into those positions like we talked about with the Rhino, setting up the 8-inch, so like, you know, disembarks into those big threat ranges, and you don't have to at that point start exposing yourself with Death Guard, and that's when you can really shine, when you can get a trade in, and then they have to waste an absurd amount of, like, well, not an absurd, but more than normal amount of firepower to remove like 5 Plague Marines, for example, whereas it was like 5 Intercessors, you just pick them up like that. It might require like an extra unit activation, which is, unit activation is important. The amount of units you can burn their activations to try and clear a unit means obviously it can't be used elsewhere. So when people are listening to this podcast, do bear in mind when me and Will talk about our own experiences, a lot of it is based off our more dense boards in the UK. We will try and talk tactics about obviously playing on the more like open boards or the GW terrain boards, but the one thing I do have to have you bear in mind, and this might be somewhere where we maybe get guests on, me and Will don't want to sit here and talk to you about stuff we don't really experience ourselves, because it is useless advice from us. We could, I mean, theory crafting's fine, there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't want to sit here and tell you, yes, this is definitely like the way to do, when we've never actually played on it. We don't want to be lying. We don't want to be talking about, I'm not here to give you advice on how to play Eldar. I'm here to give you advice to play Death Guard, because I don't play Eldar. The same reason I won't give you advice how to play on GW terrain, because that's not, you know, the 4 big squares aren't like a standard thing over here. It just doesn't happen. So me and Will hopefully get some people maybe on as guests who can give you better information than me or Will can provide. So I just want to clear that out, because I knew a few people in the comments were like, oh, what about US metas and stuff? We are aware of it, so just be aware, like when we talk, it's mainly about UKTC, but we will get something sorted for you fellas.
I mean, this is it. I mean, we kind of did touch it very briefly last week. I mean, obviously the Demon Engine builds work a little bit better in the US on those kind of like denser boards where the kind of terrain is impassable. So you have, you know, hills and things where you can make, you know, a meat wall with effective white haulers and stuff and stop infantry from walking through them. And, you know, I know Don Hewson, I don't know Don Hewson personally, I know you speak to him, but I get the impression from sort of looking at his list from afar that that's how he plays and how he sort of like structures his games. So I mean, that is, you know, obviously a very valid play style. It's just in the UK, because we use so many ruins, it's not as easy. But I mean, the UK does have some of the GW stuff. I mean, you know, Element Games has got that on their setup, and it's okay. I mean, it's weird for Death Guard because it depends on those like the strips and the plastic strips, or the I don't know what is it, UPC that they're meant to be. I don't know. It depends on what terrain sat on top, of course. You know, when you touch it, how see-through it goes, and how big the line is it can get. Because we are fully aware that there are some sort of, you know, heavy shooting gunline armies that do, if they can get line of sight to Death Guard, they just tear through them, and that is, you know, one of the sad things about Death Guard. You know, where obviously they did get ranked to D-tier faction, where there is some, you know, sort of something behind why they did that. We don't necessarily agree they should be as far as way down as D. But, you know, that's why those sort of players are ranking them like that. But again, those players, again, to caveat that, the Art of War guys, because, you know, there's other people who've done it too, but they're talking about armies, you know, can you go to an event and go 5-0 with this army? What they're basically saying is, out of all the armies in the game, Death Guard are the one that they think is the least likely to go 5-0. And to be honest, I'd also agree with that, but 5-0 isn't the be-all and end-all. You know, going to an event and going 3-2 is brilliant, going 4-1 is great. You know, I think, you know, as a faction sort of specialist and someone who plays a faction, sometimes you just ignore what's happening at the top of the meta and just focus on how you're doing in your faction, how you're doing against the people who play the faction, and just try and sort of find your place in it. You know, if you go to an event and go, I'm going to go 5-0, and there's, you know, 10 guard players, 5 Iron Hands players, and, you know, 200 players in the hall, if it's one of the UK, you're not going 5-0. You know, just, you know, don't even take yourself up for that fall.
Challenge accepted.
Going to go 3-2, and my last game, I want to have, you know, 3-2 before my last game, and I'm going to get that 4-1 in. That's what I'm going to push for. And they're kind of realistic things. And then, you know, when you go away, if you get that 4-1, or if you've got that 3-2, you'll feel happy and satisfied with the event. You won't come back feeling angry and upset that you didn't get your 5-1.
Yeah, I do think you touched on something really good there, which is like, in general, like positivity is really important. And so you people, I feel like, can be really harsh on themselves for like 2-3s, 3-2s, but like end of the day, like even getting 2 wins is still like well done, like nice one, man. Like 1 win, you know, it doesn't matter. It's all about showing up, having a good time, doing the best you can, and just trying to improve on your last performance. Don't compare yourself to the top. Don't compare yourself to those really strong armies, because I mean, okay, Death Guard's not in a great position, but this hobby has and always will be, and this is what people really need to understand. Armies are permanent, like models, obviously, well, the update, but army, models are forever. The looks and aesthetic of the lore, etc. Why you love the army stays. Rules are always changing. One day you'll be on S tier, next time you're in C tier. Welcome to Tyranids. Even though they've been doing pretty well because they found another build, which I said they bloody would.
Well, do you know what? I've got a prediction. Because obviously, if you notice, the last 2 D tier armies were Space Marines and Necrons. And, who's D tier at the moment is Death Guard. So I wonder in the next one, are we going to go from D to S? Are we going to sort of follow this trend? Because if we are, guys, get your reps in now. Because when we're an S tier army, then you'll be ready to smash those top tables. That's when the 5-0s really will be on the cards. But
and also remember when you do, until that happens. But remember, until that happens, when you do get your wins with what is seen as a D tier army, really take pride in it with yourself. Like Will went 2.5. I'm calling it 3. I'm saying 3.
There you go. We'll call it 3. Just don't tell Matt how important that.
But that's really this is an army that people literally. There was a Reddit post up. I think it was. What was it? It was to do. Someone was talking about Death Guard. I can't remember the post, but everyone in the chat. It was Goonham. It was Goonham's article for the Arcs of Omen. Death Guard faction focus. And the comments on the Reddit page were literally like, Death Guard's on life support, lol, these guys are smoking copium, haha, get real, Death Guard can't even play the game. If you're one of those people, and you're playing the army, and those are like the things you're having, I promise you it's more than likely a skill issue. I don't mean that in a nasty way.
Nice.
Like, the army is not in the best spot, I won't lie to you. We can struggle against certain matchups, but you definitely can still play this game, and if you play a little heart out, like Will went 3-2, like that is a positive win rate, like that is a 60, I don't know, 66%? No, maths is hard, Aiden. 60% win rate in a 5-round.
65 maybe, I'm not sure. I'd have to calculate it out.
60%. Maths is hard on the spot, but be positive, guys, and don't listen to all the naysayers. Just keep practicing, keep going. We're going to touch on to the overall meta now, so we're going to talk about what we are actually going to start seeing, what we're going to start facing. So we'll kick that off now with probably the big boogeyman in the room. Well, it's between Iron Hands, all these, I think. Should we go with Dark Angels first?
Yeah, I think Dark Angels is good. I mean, obviously, the big boogeyman is probably Guard, but as we talked on last week and what I kind of alluded to before, when you come up against Guard, just treat it as a learning experience, see what the army can do, and just try and get the most points you can out of the matchup. I think going in and you can win. Don't get me wrong. I actually beat Guard at an RTT the first weekend of Arcs of Omen, but it was a guy playing a fluffier list, and there's no pride in that basically. But you can still get the wins, and just because you see Guard as an army doesn't mean that. But if it's like the meta Guard build, especially if it's someone who's like a known player in your area or a skilled pilot, you're up against a brick wall. And don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean you can't win. Like we've got Aiden on the podcast, and I'm sure Aiden in a few weeks is going to come and tell us some stories about how we pulled out a sneaky win against Guard.
I tabled the Guard player, and I didn't lose a single Plague Marine, actually.
There you go, see. I'm sure we can have some stories, but for me, immortals like me, I look at that match and I go, right, okay, I'll just get what I can get out of this, especially if it's a tournament. Like I was saying before, say I'm 3-2 at that point, or 3-1, it's the last one, whatever, you think, stuff it. I'm 3-2 either way, and I'll take what I can. Or if you're going to be 2-2, whatever, then you've still got one game left. Just try and find positives and don't worry about it. But there are lots of times we can beat, and this is the good thing that we want to talk about, because So
just real quick, like Will said there, if the cards are against you and that matchup, definitely cards are against you. Don't just sit in despair. I know it's what our Legion loves to do. It's our thing and our thing, but just play it out. Don't just sit there going. The second you go into a game with I'm definitely lost. You have 100% lost, and I got taught that the hard way. I think it was Mike Porter who talked to me about it, because I get extremely nervous going into my game, especially round 4, round 5. And Mike Porter was literally, when I first met him, he was like, "You're all right. You're about to have a fucking aneurysm." and he was right. And it's because the first thing I said was, "Well, I'm about to get my head caved in." And he's like, "No, you're not." He's like, "Be fine." And I lost the game, but you know what? It was nowhere near as horrific as I thought.
It didn't go and beat you outside like you'd heard the rumours.
No, exactly.
That's what he does. Stands across the table with a baseball bat and goes, "If you don't let me win this, I'm going to do you in That's how he won all his games with the Harlequins. Don't let him say otherwise, because he threatened people with baseball bats. You heard it here first, guys.
You ever seen his opponents after the game? No, didn't think so.
Yeah. You know, if man down, you never see them again. You know, see the pop up on milk bottles and stuff missing. You know, Mike Paul, he's a murderer. He's a murderer. There we go. I do know Mike, and if he listens to this, which I don't know if he would, but he'll only joking. No, Mike. But Aiden's right. We're just making jokes about how really a game of Warhammer, it's not life threatening. No one's thing. The most important thing is to have fun with it. Even if you're going to lose,
and stay positive.
Yeah, it's you know, you've entered into a social contract with your opponent, and it's important that you enjoy the game. You know, if it's going badly, just start making jokes. You know, like have a laugh with your opponent. You know, say, well, you're going to win the game, but if this Plague Marine squad kills that Lehman Ross, you owe me a drink at the bar. Go on, I'll bet you on it. Kind of have little things like that, and that's be a good opponent. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. But onto armies, we can, and I'm not saying you can't. Obviously, we never say can't, never say never. But Dark Angels, they are a big sort of like boogeyman list. The whole Terminator break, unkillable, transhuman, Thunderhammer, Storm Shields everywhere. So, do Death Guard will have a really bad matchup into this one?
Oh, is this like multiple choice or?
You already know the answer.
I think so. It's not an easy matchup. Like we've got to be realistic as we're talking about it, but it's also a lot more favourable than a lot of other factions for a number of different reasons. One being the Foul Blightspawn, of course, because a lot of the Dark Angels Terminator builds are quite combat focused. So if they're going to come and tangle with us in close combat, we'll get to swing first. And this is where the next thing comes in where we're really good. Arch Contaminator. Now, obviously we talked about last week. If you don't know what Arch Contaminator is, you know, read your codex before you come back. We were joking there. Obviously, we'll explain things. Arch Contaminator, you re-roll your wounds. Now, the reason re-rolling wounds is important because
with plague weapons.
On plague weapons, you can't just re-roll your wounds and everything.
It's just everything. Fuck it.
The reason that is because Dark Angels have transhuman built into them, like on their data sheet. And transhuman means you can't win on anything less than a 4. So a lot of armies, you know, average dice go out the window. You know, even if it's like what should be average, you know, you roll 8 dice on a 4+, it should be 4. But sometimes dice spike. Sometimes they go spike up and they spike down. And Arch Contaminator, it kind of fixes that math a little bit, so you can kind of make the Deathwing Terminators just more like normal Terminators, and you wouldn't look at normal Space Marine Terminators and go, oh my god, this is going to be terrible. Actually, you know, you think, well, actually, I can probably get through these Terminators as long as I can get the swing first, or, you know, I can set it up so I can soften up with a bit of shooting before I get the charging, because realistically, we probably do have to kill them in combat to get the most out of them. But that's something where we're really strong into them and we actually have a really good game. So yeah, like Dark Angels, you know, and they're also slow. So this is one of the few armies, unless they've got, you know, the Raven Wing detachment. But again, they're squishy, the Raven Wing bits. So you don't need to be too worried.
The Raven Wing is the scariest part of that list for us to face, definitely. Because it obviously has the speed, has maneuverability. Now, the good thing is if they go heavy into the plasma bikes, obviously they can make the plasma damage free, but it does burn a lot of CP. Which is, you know, CP is a resource, it's not the worst thing. We can also, if they don't do that, obviously it's damage 2 down to damage 1 if they overcharge, which is really nice for us. We obviously still have plays like Cloud of Flies, and also the bikes and any speeders they have really don't like Contemptors. Like, really don't like Contemptors. So we still have plenty of like ways to get in. It's all about their balance of their list. If they go more Terminator heavy, it is more in our favour than the Raven Wing side. Obviously Talon Masters are a huge threat. They're the thing that we sort of need to deal with the most there. So I'd say that's the best thing to look out for. But when you're going against Dark Angels, obviously you got to think about your secondary game. Now Dark Angels, if they go Terminator heavy, as Will said, it's quite a slow army, which means you're not really going to be under the pressure that much. So you can maybe start thinking about stuff like Despoiled for late game, because you're not going to be under the pressure to have to make stuff happen early. Obviously there's always going to be a sort of like a slog for the middle, especially if you're on 5 points, 5 objective maps. There's going to be a big brawl over the midpoint. They're going to put the Terminators there. Obviously you're going to want to not just let them sit on there and get 12 every turn, so you have to then react to that, and that's where the Arch Contaminator plus Plague Marines comes in, because they will hit them hard. But you're fairly safe on your 2 other objectives, so Spread the Sickness stats become really nice. Don't be afraid to, obviously, if you need to take a first turn, if you get first turn, go for a quick spread. especially if you're against all Terminators. Like, even if you have to sacrifice 5 Plague Marines out of a Rhino, because there's not a huge chance they're going to be able to counter charge that unit.
Yeah, get the middle first, so it's out of the way. So we want to, because obviously you have to hold the point. So there can be models on it now. So obviously previously, before the update, if there was an enemy model, you just couldn't do it whether you held it or not. But now you just have to hold it. But obviously their Terminators are obsec, so if they get 10 Terminators on there, you're going to have to put a lot of resources in. And then obviously once you're fighting the Terminators as well, the unit that goes into sort of charge can't also spread the sickness. And you're not really going to want to spread the sickness unit in front of what's going to charge through, because you might end up move blocking your own units. So they're little things to think about.
Yeah, so even if you have to sacrifice like a 90, are they 90 points now? I can't remember. Plague Marines are 90 points, are they? 95.
Yeah, 95 it is.
95, yeah. Even if you have to like throw one of them out onto the first turn, just onto the point, to get the spread the sickness 4 points just locked in. Again, they'll only get killed if they have Raven Wing, which is not the worst, but just make sure that if they go to shoot them with Raven Wing, because they shouldn't get charged again because of the speed issues that Death Wing have. But make sure if they're going to go get an angle on your Plague Marines, make sure it's an angle that if they take, you can then react next turn with like a Contemptor. Try and always make sure when you're doing that, you do sort of see where your opponent will get that angle, and then make sure you're in a position to get the angle back on them. Because that way, you're not just trading your Plague Marines for free, they have to make the conscious decision to, right, okay, these bikes here, this like, I don't know, 5-man bike squad or whatever, he's going to come out here, pick up the Plague Marines, but then you have the conscious decision to go, right, but if you do that, I'm going to get my Volkite Contemptor to pop out here, and I'm going to trade you for those 5 bikes, and the 5 bikes are going to be more than the 5 Plague Marines. Plague Marines are very cheap.
There's also another thing to mention on the 5 objective mission. So, talking about the Lords of War event that just happened, there was one just before Christmas where I also went to, and I actually missed out on a 4-1 there because I actually played against mission wrong. So this wasn't Dark Angels, it was against Black Templars, but Black Templars, the way he played it very similar way and described the Dark Angels game. And I actually thought after I played it, but the way I played it wasn't a bad way to play it, and I could easily have won, but I played in a way where it became down to dice. So basically he moved his whole army in the middle, and then I deployed behind the wall, sort of expect, well, I'll just move my whole army in the middle. Because he got there first, we just spent all game just rolling dice at each other. There was no tactics at that point. It was just, I charge into you, here's some dice, here's some saves, you charge into me, here's some dice, here's some saves. And it was just all chance. We actually thought after the game, what I should have done is, at a point, I should have left the middle and skirted down the side and gone to attack one of the objectives in the far. Nobody's not the one that's deploying, but on the far right, if it was that way, use some flesh mowers. I mean, I have knights in my list, so I use the speed of the knights and actually turn the point on him and use his slow speed against him with a couple of my faster units. Because in the Dark Angels matchup, if he doesn't have any Raven Wing, all of a sudden, if you've got a couple of flesh mowers, depending on what's on the objective, they might struggle to get through it, but actually all of a sudden you're much faster than him. It's a rare occasion where you can actually outpace them and make him have to pivot and go in a way he doesn't want to go, and you can actually catch people off on the primary that way. So I thought afterwards in that game that I played, that's what I should have done. I shouldn't have just gone in like a meathead and just go, we'll just punch each other, and then I'll lose on 3 points because you made more saves than I did, which could have just as easily gone the other way. But it was a coin flip at that point. Was if I'd have been more tactical, thought about it and gone, actually there's an opening here, I'm going to go for it, and made him have to sort of go on the back foot, that would have been the smarter play. And I think, depending on the mission and the map, I think there could be situations where you could come up into that with Dark Angels, especially if you've got your Rhinos. Maybe that's the time where you just yeet your Rhinos at one side of the board, just try and put pressure on an objective that he wasn't expecting to have to defend. And I think that could also be a nice little tactic in that matchup.
Yeah, it's definitely, I definitely think it's a winnable matchup. So for secondaries, I think you're looking at sort of spread the sickness again. I'd possibly start considering Despoiled Ground. Now be careful with psychic stuff, because obviously Warp Ritual, they're going to want to put a lot of stuff in the middle. This interrogation just generally isn't very good anymore, but also their Terminators can all take the little watches in the dark, which means any of their Terminator units can actually deny. So just be careful about that. People don't know that, but all little dudes in the green robes can all deny potentially for them. So you're probably looking at, like I said, going for spread, despoiled. The third one's a bit harder. If they're heavy on Terminators and you're pretty confident you can kill them, you could potentially go for no prisoners, but that's really like a hard ask to kill them all. So it's obviously 30 wounds a squad, but that's still a really hard ask. So for that last one, you could. That's a bit of a tough one.
I think I'd go no prisoners, to be honest, because I think in that match
it's guaranteed points. That's the thing.
I think you might just have to go for it. I mean, Assassinate might not be bad depending on the build.
Yeah, your third one's like your flex one.
Yeah,
I think. I wouldn't go Flea Invectus. Deathwing are completely immune to morale, and trying to guarantee pick up 7 could lead you to overextending, which isn't great.
Yeah, I mean, you're never going to pick up 7 Terminators, and they won't run as well, because, I mean, I don't think they actually can run Dark Angel ones, can they? Can they not? Because you have to do the morale just to fall back.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they're completely immune.
Yeah,
so obviously, well, then we'll talk about, let's move on to Custodes. So, with Custodes, and I know a couple of people are probably listening being like, oh, you kind of just briefly touched on Dark Angels and moved on. Well, the reason for that is because when you face Custodes, and you get, especially compared to the Deathwing build, heavy builds for Dark Angels, you kind of need to they have the same game plan. They want to put really tough infantry on the center point, score 12 every turn because you can't take them off that center, while being extremely durable, and then scoring the secondaries around that. So when we talk about them, we can kind of like lump them together. Obviously there is some differences, some pros and cons for each one. The Raven Wing, for example, are a big pro for the Deathwing for the Dark Angels. You just call them Deathwing, don't you? Because you're so used to it.
Yeah, just wings, that's all they are.
Wings. Obviously, I know Custodes bikers are quite scary, but I don't find them as worrying as stuff like Talon Masters. Obviously, they're untargetable, can't really interact with them. Damage-free Plasma's a lot more scary than like one multi-melter missile or melter missile per Custodes bike. And Custodes bikes, they're not bad in melee, but obviously 2 damage into DR is pretty, good for us. The main thing that Custodes have going for them, though, is obviously the ability to shut down rerolls, which obviously Deathwing can't. So it's give or take a bit of both, but in general, I think, like for example, if we go for Plague Companies against this 2 factions, I'm still probably picking the Inexorable. -2 to charge is really good, especially against sort of like slow-moving infantry armors. Being able to, space yourself out so that if they want to charge, it's going to be like a 9 or even like an 8, and then dropping the -2 to charge on them. That's really, like, people won't take those chances, and then you get the counter charge. Obviously, both these armies have really high saves. Inexorable, once again, coming in with the extra AP is just going to really help you push through the damage that you need to. I take Inexorable for most things because I think it's the most well-rounded one. I can see the appeal for Ferryman. Obviously, the ability to turn off the fight first if they charge you, because obviously the big aura on the Foul Blight spawn, because you can extend the fight. Like, it's not fight last aura, it's a don't count as charging. The only problem I have with that is fights against Custodes and Deathwing, they're not like fights against stuff like Blood Angels and stuff, which is usually over after like a first activation. I don't know if you see it this well.
It's gonna be a grinding slog, isn't it? I mean, that's the problem. I mean, this is very matchup specific now, and I actually don't think you should take this if you go into the tournament, because I think it's too focused. But if you're going at the Dark Angels, I think you might actually want Mortarian's Anvil. Then you can switch off their rerolls, and then you might actually win in the sort of, we're just going to stand here and slog it out. But again, that's if you go with like a 10-man Terminator brick yourself, if you're going for the Blight Lords, which again I think is such a specific build where it might do alright into Dark Angels, but then you're going to get smashed by everything else. So I think that's another thing to be careful of. Don't focus too much on one matchup, because there are sort of downsides, because you're right with the Inexorable, the -2 to charge, the extra AP. There's different situations and different matchups where you can use nearly all of the benefits. Some armies you can't use the movement, but those armies, for example, use Votan, the -2 to charge does nothing, but obviously they've got transhuman still, so the extra AP that really counts there. So it's a lot more usable across the board, and it's a lot more sort of.
Did you mean Armor Contempt then?
Armor of Contempt, so that's a bit different.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like it's the reason I still believe Ferryman works best as a teams event, where you can definitely put yourself against melee matchups, because Ferryman against something like Tau does very, very little to actually impact the game, whereas Inexorable, even though the charge again isn't going to get used much, a good flash outbreak into like a unit of Crisis, that extra AP is going to help you start pummeling through the unit a bit quicker. I just think it's the best all-rounder, and people hear me say Inexorable Ox, it is my favourite. I do agree. I think Mortarian's Emblem could be great, so if you're like obviously listening to this and you kind of just play one-off matches every so often and you just want some matchup advice, Mortarian's Emblem's not a bad choice if you want to go for the pure slug out, 10 Blight Lords versus 10 Deathwing. Obviously make sure you bring a Biologist Putrefier to help those mortal wounds.
Yeah,
Deathwing really don't like them. Yeah, Deathwing really don't like mortal wounds, so Biologist is really good. Now, Custodes will... Well, to be honest, this is the interesting thing. Custodes have sort of changed sub-faction. Obviously, Emperor's Chosen is still not children. He's still really popular. Yeah, that's a different game. Emperor's Chosen for the 4-up versus Mortals for Custodes is still very popular, but there's been a change. I don't know if it's Solar Watch or it's one that lets them advance and charge. I'm not too sure. Obviously, if they take that, they go back to a 6-up Mortal Wound. If you're coming into a matchup against 6-up Mortal Wound, really start combining that Biologist Putrefy with Arch Contaminator. And even with your casters, this is something I've noticed a lot, sometimes it's not really worth casting certain buffs or debuffs with your casters. I run 2 casters, and a lot of the time, I'll actually just start smiting. Like, if you get 5 turns of smites into Custodes that don't have the 4-up against Mortals, that really starts to add up in value. And you can be surprised at how much you can just pick up. So, I think if the Custodian meta goes away because everyone's thinking like, Nids are dead, so those Mortal Wounds aren't a problem. Thousand Suns are really struggling at the moment, so their Mortal Wounds aren't a problem. Grey Knights are still a problem, so they might stay with Emperor's Chosen, but if Grey Knights, they're sort of like the teetering in and off at the moment.
Grey Knights are a funny one. I think they're in the meta, but I don't think they're like a big boogeyman. Do you know what I mean? But I suppose at the same time, if we're realistic about Death Guard, going back to one of the earlier comments about, sort of top table factions and things, you might actually face Grey Knights more than you face, say, Guard. Because Guard, maybe you face them round 2 or round 1. Maybe it's round 3 if you're having a good run yourself and you've won your first 2 games. But you're unlikely to face them, sort of once that point, because they're probably going to be sort of winning their first 3 games, unless you're getting lucky with them dropping down. Whereas you're looking at Grey Knights and things, they're probably going to be sort of sitting around the same tables as Death Guard at an event. So maybe it is something to sort of think more about taking into them than some of the stuff. And Custodes will be around as well, and so will Dark Angels, because again, they've got tough matchups, haven't they, really, into other factions.
Yeah, and Custodes in general are just a generically really popular army. And when Custodes are good, everyone can get a Custodes army pretty cheaply, so Custodes become really popular. So if there's a matchup I'd probably ask you to sort of brush yourself up on, it probably might be the Custodes one, because they're getting a lot more representation recently, so prepare yourself for that matchup. I do think we have a pretty good matchup into it. If we're talking about secondaries versus Custodes, again, as with the prior Dark Angels, Despoiled Ground can be a good pick, because again, you just pace yourself out, don't overcommit, play for the late game. That's not a bad thing to do. Also, Spread the Sickness is, again, easy. Don't be afraid to go and sacrifice 5 Plague Marines early.
I think Spread the Sickness at this point is probably just you take
it every time.
2 others in it. There's maybe a couple where you could take banners if you're going to just stay in your deployment zone, but generally you're going to want to take Spread the Sickness in every game.
Like even if you only get 3 objectives on Spread the Sickness, it's 11 points. That is better than most secondaries you'll get otherwise. So I would generally just keep spread. Except I don't even know there's a point as really mentioning it, because I'm going to recommend it in every single sort of game. It's just that good of a secondary. I wouldn't do obviously Fleeing Vectors versus Custodes. Trying to pick up 7 Custodians a turn is definitely not an easy thing.
7 Custodians, you've probably got half the
army. Yeah, you're probably already winning. An interesting one you could consider is behind enemy lines against Custodes if they don't have many units and you're on a wide deployment like Dawn of War, because it's really hard for them to screen out, and a single 3-man Death Shroud in a corner could actually be really annoying for them to pick up.
That's fair.
But again, this is when you start looking at at the table, you sort of look at what they've brought. If they've bought 2 big units of Wardens, which are like 500 odd points, something stupid, then each, then you can start to consider that sneak 3 Death Shroud in. They're not going to have the units to go and deal with that, and then you're just going to start racking up 3 points.
It goes back to what you said about terrain as well. Also, just sometimes before you take your secondaries into account and things, look at the terrain, look at the deployments, and see where the terrain is, because sometimes you get, for example, it's not necessarily this match, but engaging all fronts isn't always as terrible as you think. Sometimes you go to a tournament, you can just see 2 ruins in perfectly positioned for the corners, and you think, I'm up against a slow army here. So you've got 2 flesh moors. If I go first and just run a flesh moor left and right into those behind those ruins, I can probably get an easy 6 points on that, and then play for the tougher sort of 8 to 10 points in the final turns once I've got units there. So terrains and things is good, and again, behind enemy lines is a great example. If there's a little bit of terrain where you think I can just get a unit there and just get a bit of cover, and then he's got to come and dig me out with some combat, which means he's got to walk over its Custodes, are not the quickest things. So that could
weaken his mid-board position, which then you could make a push and potentially just take the mid. Like, I think a lot of people get caught up with is they try and lock in 3 secondaries before they see a game, and I don't think that's the right thing to do. Lock in spread usually, but always pick your secondaries based off your opponent, the deployment, and their composition of their army, because that is an example of that behind enemy lines where it can actually become really good for you. But if you're on like a quarters deployment, don't pick it because you're not going to get in.
Yeah, that's it. I think that's one of the really good points that you made there, actually, and I think that's something to sort of, again, when we're sort of, referencing back to this, fabled art of war D tier, I think that's one of the reasons why, again, people don't look at Death Guard and see the strong faction, because you can't just lock in, I'll do these secondaries every game unless I'm against Knights and I'll swap one out for bring it down, whatever. Like, I think that's one of the things with Death Guard require a little bit more thinking on your feet, whereas, Necrons, it's just, I'll do these 3 secondaries almost blindly. And I think that sort of helps the stronger armies be strong, because it takes that sort of thought process out of the game, and you can play more of a linear, each game is the same or very similar. And I think that's something to take into account with Death Guard. You have to sort of take more factors in and be a bit more sort of thinking on your feet, and sort of, like Aiden said. And obviously, Aiden, you're much better at this than me, is come up with a game plan and just sort of going, right, I'm going to stick with it, be confident, and having a game plan that you can sort of see through from start to finish. I mean, obviously it helps if you can think sort of 2 turns ahead of where you are at the moment, which I get the impression is something that you're sort of capable of doing. But that's sort of something that feeds back into secondaries and thinking on your feet and being flexible as a player.
Yeah, I think it's it's definitely something you learn over time as well. The more games you get against certain factions, and on different deployments, you'll sort of pick up, the where you can start seeing weaknesses in where certain factions. So, for another example, if you're against Custodes, if you have a more grindy mid board, and you could possibly even go for Warp Ritual. I have 2 casters in my list, so
careful
losing one.
Horse against Custodes, because they do have a shutdown.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I was going to say. Again, know your opponent. Have they got any Sisters of Silence for one? Because they have a 4-up auto deny. Never take a psychic secondary against an army that's a 4-up auto deny, because I know you sat there thinking, it's only 50-50, but every single time you do it, it's never 50-50. It's like 99% going to deny you.
Yeah. Yeah, even against armies with 1 deny, for example. It always haunts me. I played 1 game against Chaos Knights, and obviously they have that one Warlord trait where they get it's just, they're not actually a psychic, but they get 1 deny, and I was I'm Warp Ritualing this, easy, and this is the easiest 12 points, and he literally, I swear to God, he rolled 4 11s, and I was like, I got it once, and I was so angry. I was like, why did I take that secondary? So yeah, so like you say, I ask the questions at the start of the game and take these things into account, because like Aiden said, it should be 50-50 on the 4-ups, but odds on, that they might just spike the 4s in that game, and you just get it shut down. There's nothing you can do about it. So sometimes, unless you're really desperate and there's absolutely nothing else, because maybe with Custodes, the Cubs, if they've got no psychic, there could maybe be an odd exception if there's this, because they don't really give away a kill secondary. But again, you've really got to be sort of thinking hard and thinking, this could well be a 0 if this doesn't go right for me, especially if you've only got 1 or 2 psychers, and you end up out of position because they're near the centre and they get taken out by something. So I think you've really got to be sort of thinking hard about some sort of secondary choices.
Yeah, and I think on these kind of games against Custodes, Dark Angels, with these elite blobs that want to dominate centre, flesh mode drones, stuff like that can be really good for pressuring flanks. But again, if the opponent, for example, has they say they really want to guarantee their far away home objective is safe, they've put like 10 Terminators on it. Don't be stupid and just run your flesh mower into it. You might pick up 2 and then you'll trade it, and it's just not worth it. Instead, sometimes it's just better to either use that flesh mower as a flash outbreak target for when it's good, or just sit on mid board and wait, and on turn 5, especially if you're going second or something, just move it, advance it, and play for Despoiled. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. Your flesh mower does nothing but scores you despoiled ground at the end of the game. And if it ticks off 2 boxes, such as, contagion range on objectives, because it will do that if it's moving into a quarter, and then also for being a unit in a quarter, that's basically just gave you 6 points, even though it's killed nothing. Don't feel like you have to throw away units just because I needed to do something to earn points back. You don't. Like, if you're gonna go in to do something and just die for it, it's not worth it. Like, you have to have the foresight to know, actually, this is worth more later in the game.
Yeah, it's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is one of the games where I'd actually, you turn 4, turn 5, do the Rhino plays, drive them into corners, turn 4, turn 5, because armies like Custodes and Deathwing really don't want to go after chasing a Rhino, but they can't ignore it because it's going to score you points. But they really don't want to have to.
Especially also talking about secondaries, also sometimes denying a secondary can be just as good as scoring your own. I mean, I learnt this from you, Aiden. I mean, obviously this won't really come up so much, this particular example of people taking mental interrogation, because it's not as good a secondary anymore. But I learnt this off you, if you've got, just don't deploy any characters on the board, put them all in rhinos. Even if you've got the tally man, you can live without that extra CP for a turn usually, and just deny them even having the chance on it. And again, if they take assassinate, sometimes turn 3, you put your characters in rhinos, and those rhinos just run off to a corner somewhere, and they don't get a chance to even get close to them, because you then sort of you keep them busy with the rest of your army. So it might be that you've maybe chosen a bad secondary yourself that it looks like you're only going to get 3 or 4 on, but if you can hold them to 0 in response, that balances out, and that's something to sort of also keep in mind as well. So sometimes trying to deny secondaries is just as important as trying to score them, and sometimes people get lost in the sort of killing in their own scoring, but actually sometimes just denying other people is just as important. And that sort of comes back to like a number of things. And you mentioned about the Fleshmaw there as well. I mean, Mortarian's a great example of this. Sometimes just projecting threat is more important than actually doing the threat. How many times does Morty just stand behind? I mean, Morty you probably don't take for different reasons, but on the occasion you do take, sometimes you can stand behind a wall and no one's going anywhere near in that quarter of the battlefield, and that's sometimes all it does. I mean, it's a quarter of your army protecting a quarter of the battlefield, so that's one of the reasons why it's not the most points effective, but it can be a good thing. And sometimes a Fleshmower can have a similar effect, because he picks up 5 Marines really easily, so unless they think they can sort of confidently kill it, sometimes you get a really good trade, especially if you've got like a squad of Plague Marines behind the wall, so if they do come and get the Fleshmaw, then you start to trade, and the Plague Marines come forward, they kill the Fleshmaw, and then they can maybe sort of pile on objectives. So yeah, I mean, we're talking more about the primary there and moving away from secondary choices, but it still links in this to keeping units alive for that despoiled ground at the end of the game. Sometimes it might be, I could push this forward and go for a kill, but actually, does that kill score me points? Because if it doesn't score me points, and I think I can, him killing it isn't also going to affect me too much. Sometimes you want to have those units, and I mean killing it, like say that they're coming in charge something near the Fleshmower, and instead of like being baiting out, you just keep it behind the wall where it is. So and against these armies, especially when they've got these big heavy pointed units, always be looking for the trades. So for example, you throw out 5 Marines onto the objective in the middle, make sure you've always set up a charge to charge whatever charges them, if that makes sense. So those 5 Plague Marines need to get cleared by like the 10 Custodes Warden break that people have been playing. That comes in. Make sure you have a Rhino with just 10 Plague Marines just within range, so that they can't be charged, but they're in a good position that after moving they'll be able to charge back. And also make sure you measure it. So against Custodes, for example, the grenade strat becomes very effective, because you drop them down to T4, so you're wounded on 4s with full rerolls, and if they want to shut down your rerolls, that means they'd have to shut it down in both the shooting phase and the combat phase, and you'll start burning their CP like crazy, and you will still do quite a bit of damage, to be fair, because each grenade that goes through potentially AP2 up to AP3 if you have a lot of virulence in inexorable, it really starts putting damage on them, 2 damage each time. And if you can do it so you can have, for example, you lose those 5 Plague Marines to the 10 Wardens, but then you trade back with 10 Plague Marines to clear out 500 odd points of Wardens, even if the same scenario then repeats and they clear your 10 with their 10, and then you clear their 10, you've just traded 1,000 points for 190 plus 95. Like, you're just winning at that point in the game. So always make sure as Death Guard you have an answer to their answer. Obviously it's a lot harder versus shooting, but in melee matchups, especially slow ones, you really have the ability to sort of up trade, because our guys hit way above what their points cost would assume. Also, in regards to Custodes and shutting off rerolls, two other things to bear in mind with that matchup. One is the Tallyman, and obviously is the Tollkeep upgrade.
Yes.
You can't reroll, so you can't reroll 1s, but your 6s can still explode. So yes. Again, that's sometimes important. And again, transhuman is a weird one. So transhuman is good, especially when they shut down the rerolls. But say, for example, I mean, it's 18 dice plus d6 if you decide to throw the grenades with the strat and then throw the extra on as well. So, you know, potentially say it's average, so it's 21 dice. I mean, obviously you might not have the exploding sixes there or not, but when you throw them, say for example, I don't know, say you get some exploding sixes, so you should drop a third, so it's 12, no, it's 14 is it should hit with, yeah. So 14 you should get another 2 for the 6, playing it safe, so you should hit with 16. Say it's average dice at that point, and they shut down, you know, you can't re-roll it half, that's still 8 dice that go through, and then that's 8 saves, you know, and especially if you push them onto 4 pin bun, that's 4 failed saves at 2 damage each. So sometimes even though they're shutting off the rerolls and the transhuman, yeah, they take the teeth out of stuff, but sometimes it's still worth doing anyway, because if you've got the volume of dice, you can still get through.
Yeah, because you've already picked up 2 wardens off grenades, you've still got all the guns in that squad to shoot, and then you can make the charge. And even if you don't kill them all, dropping a Custodes unit's like 2 or 3, the damage 2 in combat into us is really bad, and you will then be able to survive that, hopefully still have enough morals to take the point off them, and then pick them up next turn. It does, like, even if you leave one alive, the value you've gained from that is incredible, and that's just one unit activation. Obviously you have multiple shooting at a unit, just focus fire it down. We're really good at stripping away units durability, as we said before, so consider flash outbreak, consider extending your contagion range, and I mean, if there's 2 units close to each other and they pop all defenses of one, obviously swap to the other, but obviously a good player won't present you with those options, they'll just give you the one option. But don't think just because they've popped it, that's like, alright, might as well just stop shooting it now. Like, you'd be surprised, like, because we have a lot of damage too in our army, and like D6 cleavers, etc. You'd be surprised how much damage you can still force through.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing in that matchup is there is actually one thing we haven't mentioned with the Custodes one, which is also worth keeping in mind. It's a double obsec, so do be aware of that matchup. Actually have to be careful on the primary.
Yes.
So I've made this mistake into Custodes, for example, so I threw my grenades into Custodes. I've got my 5 cans stand on the objective. I threw my grenades into a 3-man, I don't know what they're called, but the 3-man kind of troops, and they're tough to kill. I've killed one guy, now I hold the point, and then I've got greedy and I've gone for a charge. And actually I've bounced off them, but they've picked up 2 Plague Marines and now they hold the point again.
Yeah.
Sometimes another important thing is you sometimes have to go, right, I have this point, I've got, say in my list I've got I think 7 units of Plague Marines at the moment. So it's like, well, I've got another, say this is 1, I've got another 6 units, it doesn't matter, I just need to hold the point for this turn, get this primary, and then next turn that'll be, I'll have another plan for that. Don't get greedy, because sometimes getting greedy is when you can make a mistake and the prime can slip away from you, and once you start that landslide, that's when you get desperate and you start having to go for like big charges and trying to move units across the board. And Death Guard, that's where we start to struggle. So sometimes, like Aiden said, have your plan and just be aware and just like try and sort of trade. Is this worth it? Is it not worth it? Should I just take the safe points? And that's something to sort of also be in, bear in mind, because that's one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Because fair play, say you've got the cleaver could just pick up both those Custodes, but it also couldn't, and it could just bounce off and you could miss, you couldn't even hit one, let alone get to the point when they're making saving throws. It's something to sort of to think about and try and sort of weigh up when you're playing that matchup, because the primary is something that actually is a little bit harder against Custodes and some factions, because we're generally sort of more MSU, and because their MSU counts as 2 models, sometimes they can get up on that quite easily.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think where we're going with this. So obviously, I'm just conscious, obviously we talk quite a lot about Custodes and Dark Angels in this scenario.
I think at this point we probably want to, because actually, I mean, we could touch on Iron Hands, but you actually mentioned something quite good with the Custodes there, and I almost sort of wanted to segue at the time, and that was about sorcerers and about casting smites. So probably what we could probably sort of skip Iron Hands for them, because they're a shooting army. We can maybe talk about them next week, but this could lead quite nicely in the Arcs of Omen detachment.
Yeah, I think if we keep this week, we'll talk about how to deal with these durable elite armies that want to sit on points. We covered quite a few good points, so you carry on with your point, and what we'll do is next episode we'll maybe talk about like the sort of shooting armies like Iron Hands and Tau, etc., because we want to talk about it all, but obviously we can't do like it'd be like here for like 9 hours. So
we could me and Aiden have to go to bed and go to work at some point.
We'll leave shooting armies for next time. Go on, what was your point?
So I think the point is the Arcs of Orban detachment. So the biggest thing I think it's changed with Death Guard. So there was a point early on in the edition where we always ended up taking, or I felt we always ended up taking a character tax. Sometimes you didn't want the Lord of Virulence, but you had to have him. Sometimes you didn't want the Sorcerer, but you had to have him because you needed to. And obviously we were locked to one character, to one Demon Prince per detachment, whatever it was. So now we can have
we had to take Psycho.
Yeah, so now we can just have one. Which one do you want in which situation? What are the pros and cons? Do we actually still want to at this point? Because I feel like this is one of the biggest things that I've sort of come across when I've been building my lists. How important reroll ones? Do I want another beat stick of the character? Do I want a Demon Prince who's a little bit more mobile? Or do I just want those cast? Because for me at least, and I'll finish my point then because I'm really interested to hear what you think about this. I find now I've gone MSU, I'm finding more and more those durability buffs, they're almost meaningless. Like -1 to hit on 5 Plague Marines, they're generally, they push out, they throw grenades, they charge, and 9 out of 10 times they're left in the open because, it was more important that they killed things in the trade, and they're just -1 damage isn't really going to keep them alive, so -1 to hit, not -1 damage. So I'm finding more and more is, how important is that spell, but then there are other spells where, going back to the Inexable, the +1 AP, where sometimes extending that contagion extra 6 inches, and also if you go for Despoiled Ground at the end of the game, a lot of people don't realise when you have to have the objective in contagion, it's the centre objective, the 3 inch, the marker itself, it's not the radius. So sometimes you want to extend the contagion to get that backfield objective, and this is why I find spells like that are really useful. So I'm like, well, do I really want the source for them for those spells? Because they are quite useful. So those particular ones, and also I always forget the name, but the Mortal Wound one where you roll 7 dice and have to beat the toughness.
Curse Leper,
thank you. So Curse the Leper again, really good tech piece, especially if you're against Abaddon who's phase locked and you just try to just grind wounds out in the psychic phase. I mean, but then at the same time, how important are those things compared to reroll ones, or maybe you just need one caster and you want the Demon Prince for his mobility because he can sort of move the -1 contagion with him, or Arch Contaminate can move around and you're not having to then sort of maybe he's investing much resource to Flash Outbreak to move it to different parts of the board. So I mean, this is something I'd be interested to hear your sort of thoughts on, Aiden, and what you're looking at with your lists.
Yeah, so it's interesting really because you make a really good point. Obviously, if you're running heavy MSU, the playcasters do become less valued. Not less valued, but the buffs they give out obviously have less value innately. Obviously, buff efficiency is better the bigger the unit goes on. So what I'd say is, personally, I'm probably still going to be running a Lord of Virulence and 2 casters, but it's for very specific reasons. One is the little cheeky bit of tech we'll do at the end for a little bit of a cheeky freebie.
There you go, hold out the end, guys. You're gonna get some spice.
So obviously I like reroll ones for consistency, but again, if you're going wide with MSU, obviously those rerolls can't be in one place, so it's not as important. I really like the Flamer. I feel like it's really good for having to, when people want to throw cheap little units like Crew or something, or like 5-10 Cultists, whatever, onto midpoint, and like we said before, like we put Marines on there and they want to force us to make we want to force them to make a reaction to clear it, so then we can clear what cleared it. Having the Lord being able to spray the midpoint from character protection, not having to reveal anything else to pick up those crap units, is something that nothing else in our army can really do.
The Foul Blightspawn can, but you don't really want to put him in front because he's if he gets tagged by the wrong thing, he goes splat.
My only problem with the Foul Blightspawn as well is against the really he's D6 shots, which against like 5-man Crew or something isn't consistently going to pick him up. I mean, it's a good chance because it's really good flamer, but the 2d6 on the Lord of Virulence gives you that extra consistency on the shots to be around 7. So, and obviously you don't need all the stats. I put the mortal wounds on 6s. I put on, so any 6 then is equivalent to like basically getting a free kill. So obviously you spray, you get 2 6s. Now I've only got to pick up 3 models rather than all 5, because they're 2 battles pop them.
And then you wouldn't go Viscous Death instead. Then you'd never sort of go for the reroll number of shots, because you obviously get to
I think
both dice,
the reroll shots is much better on the Foul Blight spawn, because rerolling 1 dice, obviously rerolling a 1 is more important, but when you're rolling 2d6, it kind of averages itself out just for the fact there's 2 dice, and when you re-roll it, the variance is a lot higher. It's not like, you re-roll a 1, the worst you can get is a 1, but if you like roll a 5 and then you re-roll both dice because you have to re-roll both, you could potentially roll even worse, which is like not great.
I never thought of that before. That's a good point.
Plus, I really like the extra AP potential from the core shooting for Lord of Virulence. Again, for the grenades mainly, because I really love my grenades. Got a lot of blight launchers in my list, which I like. And also should I just say it now? No, we'll save it for the end. The tech piece. No, we'll save it.
Okay. So,
right.
Just say we'll wait.
Demon Prince is basically just a beat stick. It's the fastest character we have. It's basically just there to be a beat stick. It has 1 cast, but that's whatever. But it's really, that's there if you just need an absolute beat stick. That's probably my least favorite HQ. Although Lord of Contagion probably is least favorite actually. Lord of Contagion is a slow beat stick, whereas the Demon Prince is at least a fast beat stick.
The Lord of Virulence has his place, I have to say, because the +4 inches on the +4 inches on the Contagion. I mean, again, it's more a Mortarian's Anvil thing. If you go Mortarian's Anvil, you probably go for the Lord of Virulence, because then you can start and have your Terminator brick, if that's what you're doing, inside the sort of free roll Contagion without having to sort of have any buffs or wait for turn 2. But again, that's quite a specific sort of build there, and I think it's very meta dependent whether that one will or won't work. But yeah, I think the Demon Prince is one of those models where he's just too many points. He should be about 165, I think, when you compare him to what newer factions got. I know all the Demon Princes.
He's weird because he's one where you look at on paper, you should be impressed when he goes into combat. Yet every time I've used him, I'm sort of like let down.
Why doesn't he have a plague weapon?
I know.
That really irritates me. The amount of times where, I mean, fair play, sometimes you also want to hit, but the amount of times you roll 2 1s to wound and you're like, I just want to, you can't re-roll it.
The problem is you'll also roll a 1 to hit, so at that point you've lost 3 attacks and you've got 3 through, and then they have an invuln and like 1 goes through and you kill 1 model with like 100 and whatever point, like 180 points, whatever he is. It's just not worth it. Like, he's just not worth it.
But the only time I've put a Demon Prince in and found him alright is actually stripping the sword and the wings off him and making him 140 points with the 2 talons, and then also
and just
giving
having him like
the extra AP, with giving him the Inexplicable Warlord trait. But even then, that's kind of trying to shoehorn reroll 1s and an extra psychic casting. And he also gets trapped behind walls, and he's got other problems. So
it's like trying to improve a bad unit, but only making like an okay unit at best. So it's not really worth it.
Yeah.
But I think Plaguecasters are the best HQ in general. I think.
What about Typhus before we move on? Because as much as Plaguecasters good, because Typhus is the other one where, because I'm pretty sure there's an old FAQ where he's not. So even though I know there's problems with the Plague Company, I'm sure that he doesn't break the army stuff. So
I'd have to check the FAQ and see if he. Obviously, the rules as intended are he's supposed to be able to go into any other Plague Company with letting them still go get the stuff. So I'm going to assume. Let's just assume that is how he works. I think if you're taking just 1 HQ, he could potentially be the best, because he does combine a bit of a beat stick and a psyker into 1 for a nice little package. I'm not saying he's the best, but I think if you go for 1 HQ and you just kind of want a guy who can do a bit of everything, obviously Typhus is really good. He's good in combat. He's got a nice, he's got a nice damage-free scythe. He's obviously a psyker, and he has some nice little mortal wound tricks. Obviously, you can't put a contagion on him unless you're in Harbingers, which is not really the best. It's not worse, but it's not the best Plague Company. But obviously, then you'd have to have a second character if you really want to bring your contagion, which you kind of do most times. So that's the real problem with Typhus. He's the best if you want to take just one of a Lord, but the problem is if you're just taking one of a Lord, you're giving up your contagion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, to be honest, I found when I take the Foul Blight spawn that he works for the contagion.
So as long as you have two variants, because obviously you need one for Archcontam. Archcontam needs to go on your list.
Is always on the grenade?
Biologus.
Biologus, yeah. Sorry.
Yes, yeah. That's what I'd run. If I run Typhus as my 1 HQ, I'd go Biologus and Foul Blight Spawn and do what you just said there. That's probably your best bet.
I think also with because it was you who did this, because I was previously sort of running 2 contenders and all this stuff, so I didn't have the CP that you had to do this. But putting the Fugaris helm on him as well is so important, because the amount of times when you put him within 6 of a unit to get the grenades off, and then the charge, you're quite close to the unit, you're quite close to the action. So often he was either 12 or 18 away if you spent the CP to get the extra sort of 6 inch on the grenades, and as soon as they're in that range, he's really, really open to a counter charge. I kept finding, so putting the Fugaris helm, the extra 3 inches just makes him a bit more safe. He can stand behind a wall, he can stand with some Death Shroud, or maybe just got a Plague Mint that isn't charging, so he's kind of a bit safe.
I find it good in MSU as well to help buff multiple units that might be spreading out a bit more, because obviously the 9 is obviously a larger radius. So yeah, I like the Fugaris helm. It's a relic you could drop. Like, if you really need the CP, you could drop that one. But if you have the CP, I would recommend it, because I do like the ability to take it. As for the last HQ,
there is something to highlight, because I noticed this on another podcast. I won't mention the names. So the Biologist Putrefier, you can't do 2 units for the mortal wounds. It's charge or fight phase. It's not and. So you can't nominate 1 unit in the charge phase to get the reroll 6 do mortals, and then pick another one in the fight phase. You choose one or the other. You don't do twice. So,
but what you can do is you can do it once in your turn and then once in your opponent's turn as well. So you can buff 2 units technically, but obviously you can't double stack it. But yeah, you can't inject in charge and then inject in fight. It's inject in charge or fight and then just the fight phase in your opponent's.
Yeah, that's it. So so that's something. Again, I listened to it on another podcast. I don't know if people would also listen to that one, but if they did, then just double check that. It's a subtle mistake. It's an easy one. So it's no one's gaming anything on purpose, but under the or in that ruling is quite an important bit.
So your last HQ choice is obviously the Playcaster. I'm always taking a Playcaster. I think like you said before, there's not much for me to go over because you touched on it perfectly. Even though the buffs aren't great, extending contagion range is clutch in some scenarios, especially with a flash outbreak onto an inexorable Ferric Blight. 12 inches of extra AP from like a drone or something's big base. It can be backbreaking. You can just have an absolute backbreaking turn where you just end an opponent right there if you've got good setup. I also think that Cursed Leper is still one of the best mortal wound spells out there, combined with Relic Grenade plus Smite. You just get an absolute mortal wound machine. That's why I always do one of my guys.
Great in the Marines. Sanguinary Guard. Curse of the Leper is like,
they hate it.
Oh yeah, they absolutely. Especially because again, I always used to forget this until and actually this is something that I sort of pointed out to you, wasn't it, in our game? When you cast on more than a 7, remember that extra mortal, and also you don't need line of sight for that extra mortal wound.
I didn't know that either.
The nearest enemy unit.
Will did it to me, and I was like, "Wait, what?"
You made me check the rules, didn't you? That's the only time I've ever won a Death Guard rule off with you. I think every other time you've put me in my place quite comfortably.
Oh, you got me good that time, and I was well happy to find out. I was like, yes. But yeah, Malignant Playcaster, I think they're just for the points. They're just so useful to have the abilities. Like you said, Miasma's not as good anymore because everyone's like a million rerolls, etc. Putrescent Vitality is good, but actually it's not for the toughness. It's actually better for the strength. Because again, if we're talking Custodes, now you're forcing them to pop Transhuman for your normal knives because they're down to T4, you're up to T5.
Putrescent Vitality is not reliable as well. I know it is.
It's not.
If you're running a 10-man Terminator brick, you probably do win it in there because when it goes off, them being toughness 6 and the extra strength, it is big because obviously they're the one unit that kind of really benefit from it. But you very rarely get it off, and unless you've got 2 casters and it's like, well, I've got that third spell and it could be something.
Yeah, that is what my third spell is. So every time I will 90% of the time chuck out a Smite rather than Putrescent Vitality. Because the Smite is guaranteed damage. Putrescent goes off on a 7, we have no bonuses to cast, it's not reliable. If I really feel like I need it or it'd make a big difference, I will cast it, but chances are my aggressive caster, which usually has it, is going to cast a Cursed Leper, a Smite, and then and the Relic Grenade prior to that in the movement phase, and he'll just try and obliterate a unit with mortal wounds, and a lot of the time it does work.
I often, I don't take 2 casts anymore because I was taking the 2 casters to do Ment Interrogation. Maybe this is why I was also loading them out that way. But I was putting Curse of the Leper on both my sides, because I know you can't cast it twice, but I found sometimes you might win on the left of the board, you might win on the right of the board, sometimes you have to push sort of, maybe it's a bit far forward to sort of, get the line of sight on the thing you want to make it the nearest target. So I found actually having that was the sort of, I'm trying to think what the word I'm looking at.
So the consistency, backup.
Yeah.
It's a good idea, especially it's now, because I don't think I'll be taking many 10-man units of Plague Marines. I think I might swap out, because obviously beforehand I'd obviously have a dedicated buff guy who was doing the increased contagion aura and miasma. Obviously miasma's not as effective now, so that might just get swapped out for a second Curse of the Leper, because like you said, having access to it in 2 different places is really nice. So that's a good point. But yeah, I think overall, rating the HQs, I'd probably still go Malignant Plaguecaster is the best HQ. I'd then go Lord of Virulence. I'd then go Typhus in a weird spot where it's like if you just want to take 1 HQ slot, Typhus is pretty fucking good. And then I'd go Lord of Virulence,
I think Lord of Virulence, if you take a Mortarian Anvil, is probably actually number 1 in that, because again,
Lord of Contagion, the one that extends auras,
yeah, but that's a specific build and a specific role for him. Otherwise, it's got to be the
Demon Prince. If you just want to beat stick, Demon Prince over Contagion. But if you want Contagion to do the Mortarian's Anvil trick, Lord of Contagion. But yeah, that's what I'd probably go for, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say the other character that you might also want to take is, you probably don't want to do this, and this is actually going to lead nicely to the other brief discussion, because obviously we're going to be conscious of time with this episode and we don't have you guys listening forever, but obviously with Arcs of Omen we get to sub in the Knights and the Demons. Don't forget about Mammon Transfigured if you are going to go
Mammon's
Demons,
interesting.
guys.
It's a Demon Prince that basically allows Nurgle Demons the old way of rerolling ones to hit, which includes your Demon Engine. So if you are going Demon Engine heavy, Mammon Transfigured can really actually add a lot to your list, letting all your Blight Haulers, Bloat Drones and Plague Burst Crawlers reroll ones to hit. At that point, you start looking at putting the cheapest HQ you can in the Death Guard detachment, so you put a Playcaster in there, and then you look at your main HQ sort of being Mammon at that point.
Yeah.
Plus he's a nice beat stick.
If Nurglings could take up a mandatory slot in a patrol,
yes, oh god,
I think Mammon Nurglings, maybe Beast and Nurgle, just Mammon Nurglings, I'd probably say put it in before the Knights, to be honest, because Mammon gives a lot, because he's a bit of a beat stick as well, and he's got a nice flamer, and Nurglings would be really nice just for that forward deploy. But unfortunately, we have to take Plague Bearers as part of that. And I know they got the glow up, and I know they came down in points, but it's 130 point tax. It's just a tax. So you're better with more Plague Marines if you're running Death Guard.
It's a bit rough.
Yeah, because they can't do Death Guard secondaries.
I think the people that are listening now, if you want to let us know next episode, if you want to talk about obviously the ranged matchups, like we said before, Iron Hands Tout, or if you're actually more interested in hearing us talk about allies and talk about Chaos Knights and Demons, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the next episode probably is going to have some sort of World Eaters theme to it. I feel like we should probably sort of go on that as a new faction, but at the same time, there probably isn't going to be a huge amount to talk about. It's probably just going to be Foul Blightspawn. So maybe if we just covered it right there in that short section. But moving on then, I feel like we've sort of, if we come to the time where we're going to get your secret Techland agent, do I need to go get a pen and write this down? And
so before we wrap up, it's a little thing I've been playing around with and has been doing pretty well recently, is a Contempt Dreadnought, but instead of the Volkites, I've swapped them out for 2 twin heavy bolters. Yeah. So hear me out. Okay.
I wish I could do like a sort of a mic drop of some kind. But go on. I want to hear this.
Okay, so I understand it's not as killy, but I've really been liking fleeing vectors, especially versus like Marines and stuff. And for 1 CP, you can turn your bolt weapons on a core unit to plague weapons. So the 4 heavy bolters become plague weapons. So then they can reroll once to wound, they count for fleeing vectors kills. The Lord of Virulence can then bump them up to potentially AP free combined with Ferric Blight, because it's a core on a 6 to wound gets an extra AP. Okay. So now you've got potentially AP free bolters, and they also, if you're against a fast moving army like Blood Angels, which I've played against, which got within 12 of me, it's now benefiting from Arch Contaminator, and it's got full rerolls to wound.
Okay.
It's weird. It's not. I don't think it's as good as the Volkite Contemptors for pure killing power, but the Volkites don't score for fleeing vectors, whereas these do.
Well, there's points as well. I mean, this actually touches on something I'll say briefly before we sort of come to, because I've been running the 3 executioners in my list, because I've been finding that the 60-inch range and the flat 3 damage, it actually helps with vehicles, especially when you can put toughness 8 things in Contagion and bring the 7s, and then you take the I forget the proper name. Basically, you +1 hit against vehicles. Yeah. It's Blessings of the Dark Master, I think, is the upgrade. So they're actually quite good. But I've found in quite a few matchups, sometimes then just not the right profile. Sometimes I just want volume to clear some chaff off on objective, because I'm literally throwing Thunderhammers into Guardsmen or Crew, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. I'm throwing flat 3 damage, and I'm not sometimes running enough shots, hitting on 3, especially if there's a minus, so I'm not sometimes hitting enough. And I thought, do I just want one Volkite Contemptor for that battlefield role, just to spray something? I don't have the points to put the rockets on, which is kind of what's holding me back from doing it. Because if I had the rockets, because I've got the Tallyman in there hitting +1, it would probably be the deal breaker, because then the rockets also sort of replace the arms in terms of the anti-tank. So I kind of have to drop a spawn and one knight to do it, and the spawn has been pretty good, especially with drop pods coming back for that screen. I reckon it's worth giving a shot, because like you said, the rate of fire is something that's really nice, and again, the Volkite does a better job than the Twin Heavy Bolters at that job, but the Twin Heavy Bolters it's a bit less shots. It's 6 each arm rather than 8, but you still got Tollkeeper to give you the exploding 6s, and I found, especially versus like Marines, like Sandguard and stuff, it's actually kind of funny to just pick them up, because it's just like, here's 12 shots going in, exploding 6s, hitting on 2s, rolling 1s, wounded on 3s with potentially 4 rerolls, or reroll 1s. Any 6 to wound is also now AP 3, and every single one that goes through is damage 2. It's actually, like, against certain profiles, it actually outperforms the Volkite. Obviously, the Volkite has the mortals, which is really nice, but it's really good for scoring fleeing vectors, because you spray it into a Guardsman squad, you'll pick up 7. There you go. 1 unit's activation has scored 3 points. That's it. Really good.
So it's an interesting thing to play around with. I'm not saying it's the new, Volcon, but I've started replacing my 1 Volcon with the 1 Heavy Bolter Dread. It still needs more testing. It's not as good versus like vehicles, etc. But I think potentially there's something there. But this is what's cool. Experimenting is cool.
So do you keep the rockets on the top? That was
yes, yeah. Keep the rockets. Okay. Rockets are just nice to have.
I might have a look at that, because as I say, I mean, I don't know if it'll fix the problem that I'm trying to fix with the knights and sort of throwing Thunderhammers into sort of chaff. Yeah. But I might have a look at that, because like I say, I'm at a funny point with points with it. My list starts with 0 CP again, but I'm used to that.
The same.
Hopefully the Tallyman can tally. But yeah, I might have a look at that myself. That's something that I'd because listeners, I also was that was the first time I heard this as well, so yeah. I'm equally as blown away by this madness.
Yeah, honestly, people listening and yourself, give it a whirl and see what you think about it. I've been having some pretty good results with it. Just let us know how you get on with it. It's pretty funny. It's not a bad unit, honestly. It's a shame Heavy Bolters cost the same as Volkite, because it's a bit stupid. Heavy Bolters for some reason are always overcosted, but it's still a pretty good unit. It's been doing well. I've been impressed, but yeah, there's a little thing. We'll probably leave you on that one.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Yeah. Leave people scratching those beards and sort of, wow, have I just heard the future meta of Death Guard?
I'm gonna try it. But yeah, hopefully there's been some good information here. It's really hard to cover everything we want to cover. Obviously, episodes can only go on for so long. So let us know what you want to hear next week. If you want shooting matchup talk, whether you want us to talk about World Eaters a bit more, or maybe a bit more, well, in general. Or if you maybe want us to talk about, like we went through HQs then, maybe we can go through troops. Just let us know what you want to hear. We'll try our best. We're going to hopefully have plenty more episodes coming, and we'll cover it all in time. It's just so hard to fit in so much.
Yeah, whenever we start the episodes, I sort of look at the clock and I go, wow, it's already been 5-10 minutes. Are we going to run out of steam? And then like 2 hours later, it's like, so yeah, we need to wind this down. So yeah, so based on that, guys, thank you very much for listening. Yeah, we obviously Aiden's the man who's doing all the social stuff. So behind the scenes, I do all the editing and things. So I'm sure there'll be some polls, and we'll ask you some sort of other episode topics, but. Yeah. thank you again for the support.
Thank you so much.
I know it's Aiden that you're more here to listen to than me, but we weren't expecting to have 1,000 plays in such a short amount of time.
That's insane.
Yeah. But anyway, that's enough for me. I'll let Aiden do his sign off and see you next time, guys.
We are trying to get onto Spotify. Something that I know a lot of people have been asking for Spotify, or podcast platform. We are working on it. It's not as simple as before. It's weird.
Sorry guys. That's me actually. It is actually, to correct it, it is actually even simpler than I thought, it turns out. I just have to set up a SoundCloud account with a particular premium. I've just been busy with work, I'm sorry, guys.
Everyone boo at Will. Everyone boo at Will.
Yes, I lied to Aiden and said, it's really hard. Actually, it turns out it's quite easy. So, I'll be honest, guys, I'm sorry. Hopefully, this next time you hear our voice, we'll also be on Spotify.
Yeah, thank you very much. Feel free to drop a like and a subscribe. I'm going to shill it out. Why not? And we'll catch you all in the next episode of the Disgustingly Resilient podcast. Thank you very much for listening.
See you later,
Bye.
guys. Thank you. Bye.